Chapter 7, Review Exercises, question E51. We have 68% of the people in China live in rural areas, and we've taken a sample, or we will take a random sample of 190 Chinese people. So we have this proportion, the distribution of a sample proportion, as opposed to the distribution of a sample mean. And I've kept the work here from E36 and P17, which is the same exact form. I'm just going to update my numbers here. So 190 Chinese. We have 0.68% in rural areas. Everything else will update there. So just another look at what some of these numbers mean. 1 minus P, this would be the proportion of Chinese who don't live in rural areas. What's this 129.2, this NP? Well, if I take the total number in my sample times the proportion of the population that's from rural areas, I should get my estimate number of people in my sample who are from rural. So this is a proportion, this is the actual number of people. I noticed that both of these NP and N times 1 minus P are over 10, so I can assume a normal distribution that's going to have this standard deviation here in terms of number of people from rural areas. So the shape is normal because NP and N times 1 minus P are both greater than 10. The mean is 0.68, so the mean is just the proportion, the mean of the proportion there. And I guess here I should, I didn't update these here. So this one is the standard deviation, and I think this one is, that one is updated already. Okay, and let me just get rid of these because I can't even remember what those numbers meant. Okay, so this is the mean proportion. So how do I interpret this? Well, if I were to take several different random samples, each with 190 Chinese people, I would, and in each of those samples of 190, I looked at the proportion of people from rural areas. I would expect the mean of those proportions to be 0.68 and to have this standard deviation right here of 0.033. And that's what these two numbers are coming from. Again, whereas this formula, this is the square root of these two numbers, so P and 1 minus P multiplied by each other, divided by whatever my sample size is. Okay, probability that 75% or more live in rural areas. So again, 68% is the mean. That's what I would expect to get in a sample of 190. But of course, there's always some variance from that mean. So probability that 75% or more, well, let me use the normal distribution. And I'm going to be looking at 0.75, where the mean is 0.68 in my population of sample proportions. And my standard error, or the standard deviation of that population of sample proportions, and that will give me 0.98. This is the number of samples that would have, or the proportion of samples that would have less than or equal to 75% of the people coming from rural areas. And then I can just take this number away out of 1, and that would tell me that 1.9% of the samples would have 75% or more rural Chinese people in the sample. What values would be rare events? Well, on the low end, I would look at going a couple standard deviations below the mean. Specifically, we've looked at 1.96. And again, the reason for using 1.96 instead of 2 is just so that we have 95% of the proportions falling within our range here. and I'm also going to go 1.96 standard deviations above the mean to give me this range that, how can I interpret this? Well, let's say I took 100 of these random samples, each of which had 190 Chinese people in them. So I've taken 100 samples now, not just one. I would expect roughly 95 of these 100 samples to have a proportion of rural people somewhere between 61% and 75%. There'd be some of these samples of 190 that had a lower percentage than this or a higher percentage than this, but those would be rare, maybe 5 out of those 100 samples, give or take a few. What is the probability that 130 or more in the sample live in the rural areas? Well, now I'm looking at the number of people, not the proportion. So I'm going back up to this mean and standard deviation here. So it's a separate normal distribution, certainly related. And I'm going to use the normal distribution again. My x value here is 130. Mean is, notice that I'm right at the mean, so I'm guessing that there's going to be 50% or so, since I'm in a normal distribution that's symmetric. So 54.9% will be less than or equal to 130. But 1 minus this, so let me get equals 1 minus this, would give me the proportion of people, probability that 130 or more people in the sample live in rural areas.